Thank you for attending the Egeria webinar programme. It's an ongoing effort to advocate Egeria and its technologies and to bring people into the community. And today we're following on around building catalogues and what you can do next. So over to you, Mandy.
Thank you very much. I am Mandy Chessel. I'm going to be the speaker of this webinar. I am a consultant at Pragmatic Data Research, or PDR Limited, and I'm also the lead for this Egeria open source project. So the description, if you've seen the advertising, is to really look at what happens after you've built a catalogue. How do you build that ongoing business value? And so let's get going. So often, people recognize the value of metadata, and as a result, they purchase a metadata catalog like Egeria. And they also realize that automation is important, and they start to catalog all their IT systems, so their data sets and APIs and topics and things, so that they build a well-populated metadata catalog. This is an important part. It's an important first stage. But the question is that all you need to do? If you've got a catalog and you want it to demonstrate business value, is this enough? Are people going to come to your catalog once it's populated? Or do you need to do more? And as you can probably guess, we've got an entire webinar on the fact that, yes, you do need to do more. And it's because the value of metadata is often indirect or an emergent property. So you have to combine this technology with changes in the business culture, so the people and the way the organization works, the process, in order for this technology to deliver value. So how do we do this? So for your long-term investment into your metadata catalog, you have to demonstrate business value. So you have to show that people are using it and the business is deriving value from it. And the only way you can do that is to get people to use it. And people have their own ways of working. And so really, unless they're directly forced onto your tool, you might get a few enthusiasts trying it, but you're really not going to get that widespread adoption of your catalog until you take some action. So use is the key. And the other thing is that word demonstrate. So it's all very well, you have lots of people who are very happy with your catalog, but those people need to communicate with the people who are paying the bills. And so you need to think also about metrics. So how are you able to show that there's business value coming through? And this is something that's not traditionally directly provided by metadata catalogs. It's something you've got to think about in terms of how your business is going to use it in order to do it, in order to demonstrate the value. And it's this demonstration that is the biggest challenge. So we're going to talk about firstly, how we increase use and where that value comes from, but then also look a little bit about metrics as well, to give you some ideas for how you can do this demonstration piece. Right, so let's start with the individual. So this is, how do we get somebody who is working with data and should get value from the catalog to actually come and use it? And so you start to think about, well, what would be their motivations? Of course, people are complex, and organizations and the way that they work and what's driving them are complex. But there are some common themes. Now, I mean, there are if you don't do this, you will lose your job. So what I would call a job requirement. It's part of the job. You have to do it. There's no other way of working. And often the metadata catalog doesn't sit in that. It can do, particularly where regulations are in place, but often it's something else. And so we move on to improve performance. And this is actually probably the richest hunting ground when you're looking for business value, because you really want to think about, well, how are we going to make this person better at their job? How are we going to make them look good for their boss? That's what I mean by improved performance. So we can provide them with better information so they don't make mistakes, or they work faster. We could automate something that they hate doing, a tedious task. Or we can provide them with brand new services that, allow them to do things that they couldn't do before. So those are the sort of things we can do to improve someone's performance in the organization. It might be that actually they've always wanted to do X, something, and learning about something new is something that they really enjoy doing. And so they're naturally disposed to explore new opportunities. And then finally, and I put this last, but it's something we mustn't forget, is that we should always reward people who do things in a way that has broader value to the business, not just to them looking good to their boss, but the fact that they're contributing more broadly to the organization and following its strategy and helping it evolve. And so this recognition thing, how do we get somebody recognized for contributing to the metadata catalog? And so really, if we think about this, to answer these questions, you really need to start looking deeply into the way people work and what drives them, and understand what their needs are. And often you can't do it for every individual, but you certainly can do it to key individuals and key representatives of different user roles in the organization. So if you've been with Egeria for a while, you'll know we have about 25 personas that represent different people within an organization. It's a fictitious organization called Coco Pharmaceuticals. And we're going to look at a couple of these characters today. But these have been put together to help us focus on how we add extra services to Egeria to deliver this business value, to help with that process. And I will cover these as we go through the charts. But even, sort of at a high level, as you start going through and looking at these different roles. So here we've got Callie, who's a data scientist, and Jules, who's the chief data officer. So he's leading the data strategy. He's looking to improve the use of data within the organization. You can see that they're both data people and they both love metadata, but they are trying to do quite different roles. And again, if we move away from the data team and we look at Faith Broker, she is the head of HR, but she's also focused on privacy. She needs metadata to do that job, but again, slightly different focus around the use of particular types of data. And then Gary, who looks after the infrastructure, the IT infrastructure, he's looking at metadata that helps him understand or evaluate and prove that the IT infrastructure that's supporting this personal data, for example, is actually safe. It's secure, it's the latest level, it's not got bugs in it. So that's his focus. Again, all metadata, but quite different needs. And now we're going to more businessy people. So Tanya is the clinical trials administrator. She's looking after particular data, which is of very high value to the organization, but also pretty sensitive. So she is, she needs to be very meticulous in the way that data is managed. And then we've got Ivor Padlock, who is the security officer. Again, he's interested in making sure people are using data properly. So all people focused on metadata, definitely there's a role for the metadata catalog to deliver value to these people, but you can see that there are subtle differences in what they're looking for. So let's focus down on Callie, the data scientist, and look at her in a little bit more detail. So I've put the link here to her full profile. So if you want to investigate Callie a little more fully, you can just follow the link. But really, she does a number of roles as a data scientist, and they range from helping with the marketing team, but the bit that she's most focused on is supporting the scientists that are developing new treatments at Coco Pharmaceuticals. So she's analysing the effectiveness of different types of treatments, the impact, looking for unforeseen side effects of them. So she is analysing different types of measurement data that's coming from clinical trials and other types of work that the scientists are doing. So she's generating new analytics, but she's also constantly monitoring existing data and existing analytics to make sure that things are not drifting and changing over time. So when she's looking for data, she needs to understand the context to really understand the meaning of the measurement she's working with. And that's what we call context. So she needs to know what it means and when it was collected and what the quality was and all that sort of thing, where it came from. So she needs to know that, but she also needs to know that when she looks through a particular file or particular set of data, if it's not there, it's not available. So for her, the catalogue being complete and to be able to have the negative, this is not available yet, it hasn't come from the hospital or whatever, is important to her. She also needs to find out who has authority to give her access to the data. That's a bit of a pain. It's always difficult to get that access. And then the other thing is that often she's working under time pressure to get results and new analytics deployed into the production so that the researchers can sort of complete a clinical trial, validate that particular patients are, there's nothing happening to their patients and things like that. And so they're getting her analytics that she's done into production at speed is something that she's extremely interested in. So you sort of think, well, there's lots of things we can do for Callie. What should we do first? How should we sort of start her down the road of getting a lot of value out of the metadata repository? And this brings us on to the question of scope. Now, if you think about that original picture, you need to demonstrate business value. So if you go and try and solve everybody's problem or the problem for all data scientists in the company or whatever, you'll find that, yes, you'll deliver business value, but it'll take a long time and you may get your project cut before you've even finished. So scope is very important in terms of thinking about exactly who are you going to help and the scope of that help. So that, it's better to deliver a series of pieces of business value that if you can show how it's growing as you're putting effort in. And so this is why the scope question is so important. So it might be that you say, well, I want to do something for data scientists, but let's just focus on the work around clinical trials. Let's get our clinical trials and the work of Callie and the research team as efficient as possible using the metadata. And then maybe we'll look at data science for marketing or data science for the finance team, because there may be subtle differences. And it might be that, if you've done it well, then the work that you do for clinical trials will almost, with little effort, will then help the marketing team and then the finance team. So always think about scope. The next thing is maybe a little surprising, not if you've worked on Egeria for a long time, but for people who've worked with other types of data catalogs. Many data catalogs have a user interface. Much of the processing and the management of metadata is actually embedded in that user interface. So people have to log on to it in order to do anything with metadata. Now, one of the things that really helps adoption is if you're not disruptive. If you don't require them to come out of the tool that they're normally working in, that's got everything that they need, and to log into another tool. So tool integration and really getting close to the way people work today is another way of increasing the metadata usage. Now, it might be that you're actually copying metadata into their main tool. So I've got a data science tool here, and we might be bringing in information about new assets that are relevant, so new data sets, for example, or information about the deployment of the analytics that Callie's built, for example. But you might also be a little cunning and start thinking about the other tools that they use, such as instant messaging, email, and it might be that you through instant messaging, you can send them a message to say, by the way, that new data set that you were waiting for from this hospital has just arrived. And so you can then start helping them with with the, sort of letting them know that things are happening and they haven't got to keep checking for it. The other thing is to think about enabling a two-way conversation, because really what you want are people to be collaborating and using metadata as an information resource, but also a means of collaboration. So it should be possible for Callie to add feedback to data sets, to report errors in it, to request access to the data sets, to help others, sort of in her community working on it. So this two-way is very important, and it might be that the owners of the data sets use a completely different set of tools. And so you want to think about, well, when Callie sends some feedback, how are we going to get that feedback most effectively to the people who need to see it, so that her end-to-end story is effective. So that's really what we're talking about here. So really, one of the things to focus on is what are the tools they use, and how can we get the use of the metadata increased through integration with those tools. Now, I mentioned notifications, and these really are key. So what the metadata catalog is an active thing. Things are constantly, new data is constantly coming in. People are starting new projects. They're trying to use the data in different ways. And so using notifications to keep people in sync. So it might be, as I say, Callie, on the left-hand side, you can see new data set received. So that could be going to Callie. She then says, oh, I need access to it. So she requests access, and then a notification goes to the person who owns the data set to give access. And then she does her work, and then she needs to send something to the deployment team. And when the new analytics are ready, that goes out. So, just updating the metadata and using the notifications that say this thing's changed can help to get people, make people a lot more efficient as they receive notifications that things they need to take care of have occurred. Okay, so we talked about, how do we make people more effective? And then one of the other things was recognition. And there's something very simple that Egeria does that can help to recognize people who spend time updating descriptions in the metadata, in cataloging and classifying and providing feedback. And that is the Karma Point support that Egeria has. So it's possible to set Egeria up so that every time metadata is created, updated, deleted, the person who did it, the user ID, we look at the user ID, and then we assign, then if that user ID has a profile, a person profile in Egeria, then we give them a point, a Karma Point. And you can set up a Karma Point threshold that says every time an individual gets a certain level of Karma points, say 1,000 Karma points, then a notification is created out of Egeria, and that can be sent to an award system, a management system. It could just simply send a note to their manager to say, by the way, this person's done this, made this contribution to the metadata environment. It could be going into HR and result in different types of awards and things. Or it might be just to create a leaderboard to say, here, these are the top people who've contributed to the metadata environment in this month or whatever. So there's lots of things you can do with it. It's a very simple mechanism. And it just means that contributions that can have a broader value than just the individual person's role. can be recognized. And it's enabled in the community profile OMAS, and there's a link to exactly how to do it. So just something that might help in rewarding the people that do get on board with the metadata catalog. Now, we've looked at the individual, so let's step back and look at the enterprise. And, you know, sort of we're trying to get bigger value by helping the enterprise transform in some way or improve its collaboration. So when we think about organizations, typically the way that they are set up is that they've got lots of things they have to do. They divide all that stuff up into teams, into divisions, into departments, and that's further divided to get a hierarchy of people working very focused on a particular aspect of the business. So you might have a sales team, a research team, a manufacturing team, a delivery team, for example. And money is channeled to each of these groups, and so they build systems that support their work within these silos. And that's really good until you want to start sort of looking across the business and sharing data between them. And so, you know, data starts traveling, you start capturing metadata about the data. It's, you know, it can be going in multiple directions. But often what happens is that there are teams that generally where business comes in, where you're facing a customer, you're working with suppliers, so you're on the edge of the business effectively. That's the source of a lot of data, and often the load for capturing, cataloging, classifying that metadata is in those teams. And then you have other teams that make use of that data, and they're building, you know, they might be responsible for particular reporting to executives or their data science teams, for example. And often they get credit for the work that's being done in another team. And that's okay, as long as there's some way to recognize the value that's being delivered by the source team effectively. And it might be they get extra funding if it's recognized that they're doing this work. And it might be that by producing metadata, they get extra they get extra value. So focusing on the teams that are doing all the work and ensuring that their perception is that this is valuable to them will also ensure that that work is done well. The best people are doing that work because it's recognized, and so the people downstream will get more value out of their work. And if you do this right, each team that is contributing is actually it's like a snowball rolling down the hill, in that as you know, the receiving teams get value, they add value, and then another team gets value, and so that it builds up over time. So here I've a single example of this flow through the organization. So here we've got right on the left-hand side, we've got a vocabulary or a glossary. And that's been built by a set of subject matter experts about, for example, personal data, some data about people. And there are some standard schemas that the governance team want the developers to use in their APIs, for example. And they have been labeled with the glossary terms. So there's a very clear definition of what that data means. And also there are tags on it or classifications on it that say how, you know, whether it's confidential, the retention rules, all sorts of things. So there's a lot of information in that schema. Now, if that schema information is now integrated into the developer tool, the developers become a lot more productive because they're not typing in their own schemas as they build new APIs, new data sets. They're using standard formats. And because the metadata that they're using is tagged, when they finish their work and they push this to the DevOps pipeline, the DevOps pipeline can now use those tags and extra information to drive the deployment process. So for example, if some of the data that's being used in a new API includes fields that are tagged as confidential, so that's represented by the little red ellipse, then it needs to be put on the secure gateway. And if it doesn't include confidential data, then it can go on the unsecured gateway. So there's an example where we've now improved the efficiency of the developer. The DevOps pipeline now doesn't need human intervention or relying on the developer to say which gateway it needs to go on. So that's a good automated decision. And then the ultimate deployed application, its metadata can be added. Let's do this, yeah. You can see this moving over. So we now have a metadata catalog description that includes this tagging for the deployed application because it was derived from the knowledge from the developer tool. And so when a data scientist now comes along and says, I want to use the data set that sits behind this application, then their work, their use of the catalog also can identify where that confidential data is. So here we've got value building through the different roles. But at each stage, each person is more effective because they're using metadata. And so they're motivated to make use of the catalog. But the other thing is that they're not logging onto the catalog. The catalog's knowledge is being pushed through the tools that they use normally in order to make those tools work better. So we've got So as I said, each stage delivers value locally. We're enabling collaboration and communication, which also helps improve value. And the other thing to do, this is all good, and they each have their own management teams, but you also need to think about who would be the executive typically, or the senior manager that cares that this whole thing works together. So it might be the CIO is the one that cares. And so these are the people that you need to collaborate to communicate not only the individual value, but the whole value chain that we've got showing on this picture. Okay, so we've talked about sort of the business people and the data people. I now want to go on to the governance people. Because what is surprising is that there are many different people responsible for different aspects of governance in an organization. And they often care about the same things. So, for example, the security officer, the data officer, the privacy officer, and the CIO, that's actually the person who's responsible for IT infrastructure governance. All care that data is used appropriately and is secure. They each can sort of say, well, they own that problem, or they need that problem to be solved by the organization in order for them to do that job. Now, the interesting thing is that although these people spend their time trying to get things working laterally across the different silos in the organization and consistently, they themselves are fragmented in their own silos. And so often these different focus areas have different leaders with different budgets. They have different definitions of their mission. They use different tools that are unlikely to be integrated. And so we need to think about, how do we connect this group of people who care about governance, that understand about governance, to be better governed themselves. This picture here is just really trying to show all the different people who would say that they owned one of these boxes. They are actually governance leaders in a different focus area, but much of what they're doing is very, very similar. And so Egeria has a common model for a governance role, or a governance, what we call a governance domain. And we're able to capture the policies, the definition, how these governance people are working in a common way, and then label it using a governance domain definition that identifies the domain. But then it's possible to show how these people are, what are the common concerns and how they are linked together. The other thing that Egeria can do is support communities, and where you have issues, situations, projects that need to bring people together across the organization. Many organizations don't have a means for doing this, and Egeria allows the collection of information about a community, who's involved, what resources they have, how to send an email to them, a simple thing like that, building shared missions, doing education, and just basically providing some sort of support structure for the people who are working across it. And if this is integrated with the collaboration tools that the organization uses, then it's a lot easier to operate these cross-cutting concerns. So here I'm showing communities for the governance leadership. So there might be an overall governance leadership community. So this is the leaders of all the different governance leaders, and an opportunity to come together, share best practice, talk about what they're doing in their different domains, and just basically give each other some support across the organization. And then for each governance domain, so here's the data governance domain, you want to be able to bring together the leader themselves, their project manager, the different people such as stewards and advocates and things who are, excuse me, who are working in different organizations, but need to come together to support data governance. Excuse me, just coughing. Right, so this is one example of using communities. Excuse me. The next is the subject areas. So subject areas are used to collect definitions about a topic. So for example, customer or treatment or product. And often with these topics, every part of the business has data about these topics or subject areas. And so data will flow much more easily and be higher value to the organization if there's some consistency in the way that that data is both defined, updated, and managed and maintained across the organization. So the subject area gives you a way to organize those common definitions, and a community is a way to organize the people who are defining a particular subject area. So if we had a subject area for customer data, then we would have the customer data subject area community, and that would bring together the subject matter experts and allow them to collaborate across the organization, because they're likely to come from different parts of the organization, and then together they can build the glossary definitions, the valid value lists, the governance definitions such as quality rules, and also common schema structures that they want the developers to use when they're building systems of that data. So again, communities help that collaboration. They help get the people process bit right. And of course, Egeria provides the technology to support this type of cross-organization sharing. Now, we did talk about these silos, and understanding the dependencies between these silos can also be done using metadata, where we can capture the capabilities of each organization and how other parts of the organization are then consuming it. So we start to get a matrix of dependencies between the organizations. And this can be done at a fairly high level. So we can say that the customer support team generate customer insight, and that's used by treatment research to understand the types of customers that they're typically following. So that would be an example of a relationship. And this type of sort of interdependency and modeling this type of interdependency is currently getting a lot of focus in talking about things like data meshes and data products. And the focus of this is trying to unpick who's supplying data to who, and what are the contracts between these different parts of the business. So with Egeria, you can take the services that you've defined for your business capabilities and start to show the products and how they're implemented, but also then show who's responsible for it. And then, of course, through the linkage to the different business capabilities, you can see who is consuming the other. Now, this is a big topic. This is a topic in its own right. But really, I've brought it in here just to show you that as you use metadata to build business context and to show how different parts of the business are working together, you can then start to create a greater discussion between these different parts of the business as to how they can help each other in their operation and their use and sharing of data. So really trying to summarize all this, really what you're trying to do is to look at the business as a series of life cycles and saying, how can metadata connect people together, make them more effective, share information around the resources that the organization has. And so here's an example where you've got the governance team supplying policies and other definitions. It's helping the development team be more effective, driving through to DevOps, and then supporting the business operations through better use and information about the data that they work with. So that's the enterprise level. So before we finish, we need to go back and think about the metrics. So we've talked about different types of value, how it can be interconnected between the enterprise, but let's just talk about how we create that feedback loop through the metrics. So just remind you of this. We've talked about demonstrating business value through increasing use and different places where this use can happen, but we want to build the feedback. And as we think about it, it's really, we have to think about the questions that the stakeholders need to answer. So, for example, what does the leader of the data governance program care about? What does the leader of the sales team care about? What does the leader of the data scientists, or what does Callie care about? So we need to think about the questions that they want to know in order to be, to say, yes, this is giving me value. So we need to start with the questions. Then we need to think about, well, what data do we need to answer those questions? And we need to think in two things. So the metric is, this is the value that we need. And the measurements are the things that are being measured within the organization or the IT systems as they run. And that's basically the data behind the metric that's calculated. So there's that. And then we also need to think again, who is reviewing these metrics, both the results, but also whether these are the right metrics, and who's responsible for refining them. So we don't want to just produce metrics that people look at once and say, well, that's very interesting, but they don't keep up with the changing needs of the organization. And of course, with all things, you can draw these little quadrant charts, because there's some things that are going to be very easy to measure and others that are going to be hard. But of course, equally, the easy things to measure are often low value. They don't tell you very much unless you understand the context within which they're coming in. So if you're looking at, you can easily count the number of databases that are registered in the metadata catalog and how often they change. But the question is, what does that tell you? Is that important? Does it tell you, if you looked at the types of these databases, that there's a movement from one technology to another, and another technology might be becoming obsolete? What does it tell you? And so this is where you need a little bit of intuition to say, well, can we learn something from this, or do we need to look at a slightly different value? Because the actual process that we're going through, we obviously need to monitor. We need to collect that data somewhere. We need to do some analysis of it, and that might produce aggregated values, the metric, the history, and some sort of insight around it. It might be that that knowledge is fed back directly into some automated process or to somebody to do something. It also might be then presented in different reports and things that people can see as they, in order to look at, say, the history of how things are changing in the organization over time. And some different examples of the metrics that you could do. I mean, you could call the metadata repository to find out certain things. So the values of elements, how many elements there are, how many times things are changing, when new relationships are happening, or how many relationships there are. And I've got consumption on the end there, and that's actually, most metadata repositories don't count how many times you change it. You have to be a bit sneaky and look at access. So things like Prometheus, that's monitoring the number of people who are calling a particular API, that's probably where you would get the consumption information from. But you also have to think about, when you're querying these live systems, what's the cost of that query? So in Egeria specifically, paging as you get, way past the, sort of to later pages, every page is more expensive to calculate. So you may want to think of other ways of gathering the metrics, which is maybe listening for events and making more careful queries to the metadata API and building a new data set that's containing the historical measurements for that particular metric. And the advantage of that, say, for example, that you start populating a database table that's looking at particular aspects of your data sets. It's much easier for people who are producing that presentation layer or the analytics, the analysis piece, because they're used to working with databases and they're maybe less used to working with REST APIs and graph databases. So this could make the consumption of your metrics much easier. But of course, it does require some automation in the metadata space to start producing these metrics. So there's a balance to be made there. And there may be other metrics that are coming in that are actually requiring human input. So you might do a satisfaction survey to say, how good is the metadata you're receiving? Have you found any problems? What could we do more? So that has a cost, but again, would give you a different perspective on how the metadata is being consumed. Now, all of these are, lots of choices to be made. And what can be quite useful is to build a metrics map. So what we've got in this map are 4 columns, but we've got the roles. So these are the people that we've been looking at, the different personas, the people who you think are important in your organization. You can talk about what they care about. So this is their concerns. And that helps you to think about the questions. So right at the beginning, we talked about metrics answering questions for these people. And so you can then follow through with the questions and the metrics. And you might do this individually, but as you start to put it on one big pinboard, you can start to sort of see, oh, wait a minute, these 2 people, actually, we could use the same metric and give them and answer the questions as possible, using the same effort. So this is quite a useful way of sort of looking at the landscape of metrics that you need for your metadata environment. And finally, I'd like to sort of talk a little bit about where these metrics go and the support that Egeria offers for managing metrics. Now, the first thing it can do is the definition of what your metrics are and how they're used and where they're relevant can actually be created through the governance metric entity, and which can be linked to multiple different places, including governance definitions. So you can show how something is going to be measured. And then we can link that to the place. So if, for example, the measurements for the metric are going into a database table or into a new database or whatever, we actually can link the metric to the destination digital resource where those measurements can be found. So that means that we can trace where the information is going. Or it might be that the measurements are actually collected in metadata. So there's a governance measurements classification that can be attached to any referenceable. So it can be attached to assets and schema types and I don't know, governance definitions, pretty much anything, glossary terms. So you can actually have the measurements within the metadata environment. And as they're added and changed, of course, you get notifications, and those can be used to populate additional data sets or to notify people that certain things have happened. Okay, so we've covered a lot of topics. So let's get on to the conclusions. So we started with the idea that you've built your metadata catalog and you've got a lot of technical metadata being loaded. And then the question is, what do you do next? Have you finished? And the reality is that metadata on its own, although potentially valuable, is often needs to be combined with changes in the activities of people and also the processes that surround it in order for that value to be really delivered to the business. So we always need to think about making sure that it's kept relevant through that integration. And we do this through increasing the use cases, that getting more people, wider use cases using it. And that has a snowball effect in that not only do you sort of demonstrate the value of the metadata to more people, but more metadata comes in. And particularly if you can allow a two-way collaboration between different people in different parts of the business, then the value of the metadata increases enormously. And then finally, people, although it might be doing a really good job, we need to make sure that people know it's doing a really good job. And so metrics targeted at the right people, the decision makers, the people with money, is a critical part of this process. So that is the content of the webinar. I'll have space for questions, but I'm not sure do we have any questions? Fair enough. Okay, so let's just finish this off with a bit more information. So as David announced, this is one of a series of webinars. And the next one is Lubcho and Chris talking about how to build a repository connector that runs in the repository proxy server. And we don't have a date for that, but it's likely to be in about 3 or 4 weeks' time. And then we have also been gathering ideas for future webinars, and that's on this list. We don't have any dates for it, and this is probably not the order that they're going to go out in, but hopefully this just gives you an idea of the breadth and depth of topics that we're hoping to cover this year. And if they're of interest, please keep an eye on the channel and look out for the webinars that are of interest to you. So that's it for today. So thank you all for listening. And if you're looking at the video, again, thank you for following our channel. And I'd like to wish you all the best wishes for 2023.